In the last video, we explored how the main purpose of biblical justice is to save, preserve, and sustain life. Remember that in the Bible, judging is synonymous to saving. When one judges the oppressor, one saves the oppressed. When one judges the wicked, one prevents injustice to the righteous. Indeed, the main purpose of the Seven Noahide Laws is to preserve and sustain life. They're the minimum conditions necessary for human civilization to endure and for life to remain protected. Yet we find a seeming contradiction. If the law's goal is to save life, then why does it authorize capital punishment, the death penalty? If the laws are supposed to preserve life, then why do they allow the killing of life? In this video, we discuss capital punishment and its role in a Noahide society. How does it fit within the salvation framework that biblical justice emphasizes? First, it's important to note that we are only talking about Noahide societies. And so we must first understand what a Noahide society is. A Noahide society is a society in which the majority of people believe in the one true God, and the majority accepts upon themselves the seven Noahide commandments as divine commandments given by God. Only to such a society does God allow capital punishment. No such society exists today, and therefore no such society has God's permission to enforce the death penalty, except maybe in extreme cases of murder. So again, this video pertains only to Noahide societies. In a Noahide society, God obligates the Noahide court to administer capital punishment for a deliberate violation of one of the seven Noahide laws. Specifically, for violating one of the seven Noahide laws that carries a liability for capital punishment. For example, murder carries a liability for capital punishment, but hitting somebody, which falls under the same category of the Noahide law of murder, does not carry the liability of capital punishment, and therefore God does not obligate a court to administer capital punishment for somebody who hits somebody. This ruling that God obligates Noahide courts to administer capital punishment comes from Moses at Mount Sinai. To prosecute for capital punishment, there must be at least one sufficiently moral judge and one sufficiently moral witness. If a deliberate violation occurs, the court is obligated to administer capital punishment. And in future videos, we'll go into how all of this court proceeding and process will work. But in such a case, a failure to administer capital punishment is a failure to uphold the Noahide obligation to establish courts of justice. So this idea of justice seems to contradict what we've talked about. Why did God list the punishment as death? Now, we don't know the mind of God, but we can surmise a few things. The most crucial point that is relevant for justice as salvation is that capital punishment acts as a deterrence. Now, I can already anticipate an objection. No, capital punishment doesn't act as a better deterrent than long prison time, for example. And indeed, that may be right for our modern day society. But that objection is not right for a Noahide society. In these studies, you must consider the population that is being studied, and only from that relevant population can we then generalize. But we are talking about Noahide societies, and so let's explain how this will act as a deterrent. In a Noahide society, the entire populace must be educated on the seven Noahide laws. This is part of the obligation for justice, to educate the populace. Ideally, the populace is educated in a belief in God, the acceptance of the fulfillment of the seven commandments, including all of the details of these commandments, and all other moral obligations that are logically incumbent. Now, most relevant for this discussion, such a society, a Noahide society, is educated on the value of life. Such a society understands that they are here for a purpose set by God. Such a society understands that everybody's life is valuable because everybody reflects the image of God. Everybody's life is valuable because everybody has a unique purpose set by God. In short, everybody is here because God wants them to be here. In such a society that values life to such a great extent, capital punishment does act as a deterrent. And one could maybe argue that capital punishment acts as the best deterrent. Now, why might it act as the best deterrent? Possibly because Noahides are trained to know that in every situation, God has put them there for a reason. Thus, a sentence of 25 years in prison may not be ideal, but if I received it, I know that God must have given me 25 years for a reason, and so I'm going to try my best to fulfill my purpose in prison. But death? In death, I can't fulfill my purpose. In death, I can't do what I was put on earth to do. So death acts as an amazing deterrent for me. In prison, I will find a way to fulfill my purpose. But in death, I'm not even given the option. So in this society that values life to so great an extent, the threat of losing life is a greater deterrent than anything imaginable. Now we've discussed that the Noahide laws are known as the foundation of civilization. They're the minimum requirements for a stable society according to God's will. In such a society then, capital punishment ensures that this society stays within these guidelines, the Noahide laws. And before you get worried, the courts are also obligated to set up guardrails within these Noahide laws to ensure that the population never even gets close to sinning. These guardrails act like the rabbinic laws. For an illustration of these guardrails, imagine an American train station. Most American train stations have a yellow line right before the rail to prevent people from falling off the platform, which would then lead to them being crushed by the train. The purpose of this yellow safety line is that if you don't even touch the yellow safety line, then there's no way you fall off the platform. So if you don't even touch the yellow safety line, there's no way you're going to get crushed by the train. And so the population tries not to touch the yellow safety line. And in doing so, they'll ensure that nobody falls off the platform. And so it's the same with the Noahide laws. In a Noahide society, courts will set up laws that act as yellow safety lines. It'll be very rare for somebody to cross the yellow safety line and then violate deliberately one of those 7 commandments. That's basically akin to somebody just jumping off the platform onto the tracks. It's suicide. If somebody does step on the yellow safety line, then they'll receive rehabilitation to ensure that they don't do it again. So I hope you can see now how the Noahide laws, again, are the foundation of civilization. They're the laws that God wants everybody to follow. And so within the Noahide framework, capital punishment signals the severity of breaking those laws. And it does act as something that protects life and preserves society, because it acts as a deterrent in a society that values life. Now before we close, I think it's important to note the following. Everybody's life is conditional. We don't exist by our own will. You are not responsible for the reason why you exist. You didn't create yourself. God is the reason why we are all existing right now. But God has also set up conditions for our existence. If we break the conditions set by the being who is responsible for our very existence, then we forfeit our right to life. If each of our sole purpose exists within those Noahide commandments, if we step outside of those commandments and violate them, then there's no purpose for why we are existing right now. Our purpose is inside the Noahide commandments. When we rebel against God, we rebel against our own existence. We rebel against our own life, because God is responsible for our life. And so when somebody wills that they no longer live by deliberately violating the law, God mandates that under the proper conditions, that person must be put to death by the hands of his own creation. In this way, we partner with God and fulfill our purpose within the Noahide Code, and specifically within the obligation for justice. And as for that rare person who deliberately violates, capital punishment acts as an atonement for him. It can set them right again with God. Now another question might be, well, what if we put the wrong person to death? In future videos, we'll be going over how the Noahide court will function. It meets very high standards, to the point where the probability of putting the wrong person to death is essentially 0. But to know how this court system will work, I encourage you to subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos. Importantly though, in the Messianic era, a time that is coming really soon, when all societies will be Noahide, it is said that people will not deliberately sin. So because of this, capital punishment will never actually be used. It'll just be written on the books. So also keep that in mind. Again, capital punishment in the Noahide system protects the innocent, preserves society, and sustains life. In a society in which everybody values life to the greatest extent, the possibility of losing their life causes an extreme fear that make it so that nobody will actually deliberately violate. Again, the courts are supposed to put up guardrails, those yellow safety lines, so that nobody actually ever violates those commandments, because to actually jump off the platform is to will that you don't exist. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed, learned something. Thank you, as always, for watching.